Hey, welcome to this week's video. This is part two of my husbandry video. Paying most of our attention to heat. A lot of great information in here. So you're going to go right from me. It's going to cut to what would have been last week's Get to Know Coach. But we're going to basically launch this week's video. We're going to go right into that Get to Know Coach. So this is going to be husbandry, basically most of the time spent on heating display cages, how to do it safely. Make sure that, it's not too hot or it's not too cold. You're going to see me. I'm going to edit. I'm going to jump right into, you're going to hear me saying, welcome to another Get to Know Coach. Wait, here it goes. All right. Welcome, everybody, to another Get to Know Coach. On this week's Get to Know Coach, I'm going to talk to you about what I use underneath my cages, my under tank heaters, the ones that I prefer, and then we're going to show you how I install them, how I affix them to the underside of the enclosure. So let's get started with, I've got a couple examples here. The first example is this type under tank heater, right? You peel this off, you stick it to the bottom of the cage. I don't like using this type. I have this type as like a backup, a 3 foot by 2 foot by 1 foot enclosure. This is probably not a bad size. And so I'm going to show you how I fix them, but I don't use this type because once you peel this and stick it to the underside of any type of enclosure, this pretty much rides with that enclosure now. I mean, you can peel it off, but you're not going to stick it to anything else. And I'll show you when we go over the under tank heaters that I like to use, why the difference, and part of the reason why I like them better, right? Because if, and we'll come back to this and we'll talk about it again later, all right? I don't have any sponsorship or anything from anybody, all right? I'm truly just showing you, what I prefer. And this isn't, it's similar to the brand that I like. Again, I pick this stuff up, when I see people that have reptile equipment for sale, if they've got stuff that I use, a lot of times I'll go and pick up a couple of things from them. Like I said, just to use as emergency backups. Somebody's under tank heater goes out, you got to have them on hand. So this one is the same style as what I like. The brand that I like for under tank heaters is called Flukers. And Flukers, you can get that, I've always picked them up at LLL Reptile. You can order them online from LLL Reptile. That's where I've always got them, and they have a store a mile from my house, and they carry Flukers, probably one of the few reptile stores that I've seen that carry Flukers, in the brick and mortar store as well. So I used to buy them all online. Now I can go down a mile from my house and get them. And the reason that we're going to look at a different angle, this is the difference, and this is this edge. And we're going to set up the camera at a better angle so that you can see what I'm talking about here, and I'm going to show you how I affix it. I affix it with nothing different than just regular duct tape. It's the way you use the duct tape, how much of it you use, that makes the difference. And so we're going to break from here, and I'm going to get a different angle. Same Get to Know Coach. We're just going to get another angle so you can really see what I'm talking about here, and we're going to take care of installing this on what we're going to use as, this is our enclosure bottom, okay? So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to get that set up, and we're going to look at this so that I can show you this edge is really what you want. All right, let's get to that. Okay, so this is really what I wanted to show you. This lip, this plastic lip, and I just wanted to give you a really good look at it. You've got the heat element, and then you've got that plastic lip there, right? And that plastic lip goes all the way around the mat, okay? And that's really the key. That's what I really like about this brand. The other thing that I really like about this brand is the mat itself isn't affixed. And we're gonna show you how I use that border. So I'm gonna give you another shot, and this will be affixed to the bottom of our, cage bottom. So this is how you want to affix this mat to the bottom of the cage. Now, this isn't representing the bottom of the cage. It is kind of representing the bottom of the cage. Don't look at what way this board is running, because I just needed to find a board to affix this mat to. This mat is too big for what I want to show you, but it's the only one I have. So we're gonna make it work. All right, so this is not the cage bottom. This is just showing you the mounting. I've got a that will represent the cage bottom, and I'll show you how it would be mounted on the cage bottom. But I just really wanted to get a close-up of this. Again, you see where we're talking about that plastic ridge, right? And so I've used my duct tape, and my duct tape just tapes the plastic ridge. It doesn't cover onto the heat portion of the mat. This is the part that's gonna get warm. This part isn't gonna get warm. I mean, it'll get a little warm because it's next to this part, but I'm not putting duct tape over the top of where it's gonna get heated and hot. That's why I like this margin or edge on them. And then you see, I don't tape the duct tape just all the way around it to make sure that it's completely hugged up against the bottom of the cage. Remember, this is the bottom of the cage. All we're trying to do is keep it from sliding around. We just want to keep it affixed in the spot we want it. So that's what we've got going on here. So we just enough to keep this mat from sliding on the bottom of the cage. You don't want to do the tape all the way around because, like we'll talk later in the next clip, you don't want to trap heat. Trapping heat is not good. When we play with heat, it's like playing with fire, right? So when we play with heat and electricity, it's like playing with fire. We've got to be very careful. I've got this so it's not just sealed to the bottom of the cage. And that way, when this gets hot, there's heat somewhere where the heat can escape, right? So that stuff doesn't overheat. If this malfunctions on full blast, I want the heat to be able to escape somewhere. So when we go in and I show you my display cages, another trick that I use that I'll show you in there to make sure that heat isn't getting trapped. Trapped heat's not your friend. You don't want to trap heat. So that's why I don't tape it all the way around, because then you're going to trap the heat under here. And you don't want to trap heat. Okay? That's why I don't like these, right? Because when you stick these, the whole bottom is sticky. There's not just a couple sticky spots. The whole bottom is sticky. You stick it, and now that thing is permanently affixed, and you're going to get hotter areas in the middle because the heat gets trapped. And then the edges of the heat mat don't quite get as warm. And anybody who's used under tank heaters, especially this type of heater, understands that. The middle of the pad is the hottest. And why is it the hottest? Because the heat's trapped in there, right? And now this under tank heater basically goes with that enclosure. Because again, if I pull that off, how do I fix it to the next enclosure? With duct tape? Well, yeah, I could do that, but now I'm taping right on the heating element, right? This is gonna get hot. That's the edge, right? That's the bottom of the sticker part you pull off. That's not a margin. The very edge of that heat mat is right there. So if I've got to stick it to the bottom with duct tape or any other kind of tape, I'm going to be sticking it right to the heating element. And I don't want to do that. I don't want to stick them to the cage like that because it traps the heat. So guess what I do with these type? Not take this off fully. What I might do is just make like, take off a corner and cut it, right? And leave the whole rest of this on the bottom if I had to use that type of pad. That's how I've used them in the past. Now I've got one more clip that I want to show you, and it's basically going to show you this, where I would put this on our actual enclosure. So that'll be the next clip we'll talk about. All right, so now we're going to use my coffee table. This is my old, like, distressed wood type of old coffee table. And when you have kids and animals, this distressed wood stuff works perfectly because you don't care if they scratch it up or mark it up. It's just makes it look more distressed. It makes it look better. We're going to use this. We're going to say that this table is our bottom of our enclosure, because that way it'll give us a better look at this. If this was your enclosure, this under tank heater would be about the right size. And that's why I wanted to get the bottom so you can see like the ratio. What's it look like? I don't want it to cover, the entire end, right? And so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna walk on the other side of the table and I'm gonna show you how I like to position. Now we're gonna say that area that way is the back of the enclosure, and this side would be the front of the enclosure. This is the bottom of the enclosure. So right now we have the enclosure facing that way, sitting on its top, so it's upside down. So you got a mental picture? So here's what we're gonna do. What I like to do when I put my under tank heater in this on the bottom is I'm gonna take it, I'm gonna put it on one side, right? I'm not gonna put it all the way to the edge, right? I'm not gonna put this all the way to an edge. I'm gonna try to get it in the middle of one side. And so this is what I'm going for, this look. It doesn't matter what side, but if like I'm gonna show you in the clips in the room, if you put the heating element, if you're stacking enclosures, if you put the heating element all on one side, the heating element and the heating side, the cage on top will help the cage below, right? Because the bottom of the cage on top is gonna be sitting basically right above the cage below it. The other thing I would tell you is if you're gonna have enclosures sitting on a carpeted floor, I would get a board or something to put under there. And then again, I'm gonna show you in my room how we stack the cages so that we're not trapping heat. But this is a perfect look, and this is the size under tank heater I would use on this enclosure. As you can see, the edge is way down here for that, so I've got a nice area that it sits back from the front, basically about the same amount of space from the back of the cage, about the same amount of cage from the side of the cage. And then this will become where the heating element is, that becomes your hot side. Now we got to figure out where we put the probe, and depends on what you want to measure. And then that heat will radiate up into the cage from like the bottom. And if you have them stacked, you also have like a warm gradient kind of coming down from the top a little bit as well. And so what I'm shooting for with ball pythons is an 85-degree ambient temperature on the hot side and an 80 degrees ambient temperature on the cool side, right? With an under tank heater that big, this large, for this large of an enclosure, that size would be perfect. And that's why I wanted to use something that would give you, kind of the right view of how large or not this should be. And I can just kind of pan over there so you can kind of get a better look at the whole mat. And I just got it still attached to that piece of wood we attached it to. And so imagine that just stuck straight to the bottom of the cage. That piece of wood that I put it on doesn't have to be in there, right? I just have it to a piece of wood so I don't have to tape it to my coffee table, right? So that's how I do it. And I know that this deal here, I know I have it upside down. It's because on the other side there's a label, and I don't want to give like I'm endorsing this under tank heater. I've just picked this one up somewhere to use as a backup. And so if I had to put this on a tank or on an enclosure, you know, I don't have to have so many backups anymore ever since they opened that reptile store a mile from my house, which is so fortunate and very lucky. But that's it. And now we'll go back in the room and I'm going to show you how I stack display cages and what I do to not trap heat in between. Okay, now we're talking about heating display cages. And it's easier for me to kind of show you over here. Here's a stack of cages. Okay. And I got my carts. I use these little carts in here. They're great. If you get, you know, I'm in a bedroom. Another little pro tip from Coach. Have some carts, some stuff on wheels, right, that you can move around in here. And that's all these are, just carts. So this is a stack of cages. The paper's kind of messed up in that one right here, this one. And it's bothering me to have it on video right now, so. All right, so those are bull snakes and ball pythons, and they're in display cages, right? And so I have the heat is all on this side. This is the hot side, right? And so if you make the hot side is on the same on every one in the stack. You can use the under tank heater under this one, and it helps heat this one, right? And then the under tank heater on this one helps heat this one too. Okay, so that's why I put the heat, if you're going to stack them, put the heat all on one side, right? So the hot side's on my, let me see, right side over here, right? And then I had these little Inkbird thermostats hooked up to each one under tank heater. Okay, so then I can make each one of these cages different heat, because my bull snakes don't like it as warm as my ball python above her and the two ball pythons down there. Bull snakes like a little cooler, so I can back off the heat or not even have heat for the bull snakes. But they're all set on a thermostat. If you're ever going to bring heat to a reptile, that heat needs to be regulated by a thermostat. Up here on my big rack, I got two of them, right? Each one's got there. Everywhere I go, there's thermostat up there. There's thermostats for every one of these. Thermostats are up there. Thermostats over here on the side. See them all? All right, so that's what I'm doing. I'm regulating the heat in every single cage. I can make these display cages for just about anything. I don't want to make you dizzy. I'm turning around. And in the Get to Know Coach, I showed you how to affix the under tank heater to the bottom of these cages. And these cages are plastic. Just because they're glass doesn't mean it's not going to work. It works fine. It's been working great for 13 years. That's a Vision cage. These are PVC cages. Works just the same. On the PVC cages, to get the temp in the cage, you got to set it a little bit hotter, right? And I've got these set, the bull snake set lower. And then you just need to decide based on probe placement. Like on these probes, the probes are in the cage, on the bottom of the cage. On these cages, the probe is right on the heat element. So I've got to make the heat element hotter than I need it in the cage to get the heat through the bottom of the cage, right? So the heat's coming up through the bottom. So to get the heat up through the bottom, I got to set the under tank heater a little bit warmer. I think they're set at like 93 or maybe even 95. so that I can get it 85 inside the cage. But it works. It works. Right? Now, the other thing I want to show you, and you can see it over here. I don't want to make you dizzy. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to spin you. See the little shim I put in between? Remember in the Get to Know Coach how we talked about you gotta let the heat have a place to escape? So if I have all of the heat over here on this side of the cage, then I got a little shim so that these two cages don't just sit on top of one another. There's an air pocket. It allows that heat to escape from in between the cages too. I don't want to trap heat. Right? When we're playing with heating elements, you don't want to trap heat. If you trap heat, it becomes dangerous. Look at, there's my white-sided bull snake poking his head up for you. I think I woke him up. He might be angry. We got to make sure, again, here's another shim down here, right? So that it creates that airspace, so that that heat has somewhere to go. It doesn't just stay trapped in between the cages. It doesn't stay trapped in between your heat mat and the cage because of how I showed you how to tape it down. Okay? When we play with heat, it's like playing with fire. You gotta be careful, baby. You gotta be careful. So all of these things, the thermostat, the shim, the way I tape the under tank heater to the underneath of the display cage, all in an effort to not trap the heat. And I just do that for precaution. And that's how I've done it for 13 years. So I haven't had any fires. I haven't had any failures. Knock on wood. Where's my wood to knock on? Right here. I'm spinning you. I'll edit that spin out, hopefully. And then this is just a shim in the glass, just to keep the glass from that snake to be able, he likes to ride up on that glass. And they learn how that door opens. I've had a snake, the only snake I ever had get out of a cage like that, it was my blue-eyed Lucy. She's over here. I don't want to spin you. She's in this cage down here. She got out of that cage one day because she slid the door open herself. I came in and she was sitting on the desk right here. And as soon as she saw me, she shot off the desk down under here. I'd never seen a ball python move like that. It was amazing. She was running, boy. She was out of here. Got under that desk before I got 2 steps in the room. And she's a 3,000 gram ball python. So I shim these too. Even the visions. Those are vision cages. They're meant to stack on top of one another. But there's grooves cut in them. See how there's a groove on the top? There's a lip on the top. There's a groove on the bottom that fits that lip. Right? So with the vision cages, you got to be really careful. You don't want to trap heat in between them. So I shim them. And you can see the shim really good right here. So that's a shim, and it creates that airspace. It allows that heat to escape. You gotta have an escape route for that heat. When we're playing with heat, gotta be careful. It's like playing with fire, guys. You really gotta be careful. All right, that's gonna do it for another video. Another successful video, weekly video uploaded. I did it again, right? When you're talking about heat, you're talking about where it's coming from, right? Where do you want that heat coming from? Are you keeping a male or are you keeping a female? Are you keeping a male to breed? If you're keeping a male to breed, you want to think about where you're bringing that heat to that male from, right? You don't, it'll kill off and it'll lower their sperm count. So what I do with the heat for males is I'm going to bring it either from the side or the back of the rack. If it's a rack, I'm going to bring it from the back. A display cage, I would probably bring it from the side or from the back. But yeah, you can hook up that under tank heater on the side. If you look at pretty much any under tank heater and you look at the directions on how to install it, it'll probably have one for underneath but it also have one for on the side. So you can put an under tank heater on the side of your enclosure. It'll radiate into the enclosure just like it does from the bottom. Then you got to worry about where your probe is, right? Because if your probe's inside the enclosure, you kind of want that set to a little temp that you're really trying to gain in the enclosure. If your probe is on the heat source, now you want to set that a little bit higher because you know it's got to go through something, getting the temp, and you're checking the temp before it's gotten into the enclosure. So if you're going to set it up like that, you need to make sure that it's going to get inside the enclosure the temperature that you want it to get to. And so that I've done that in my enclosures, and so that you saw some that are set higher temperature that we've all heard, right? Well, because to gain that temperature and to get that temperature in the cage, I'm reading it from outside the cage. So I got to make this unit the temperature that it needs to be so that it makes inside the enclosure the temperature I want it to be. So those are parameters to look at, right? You want to look at your heat. With ball pythons, they don't bask. Nocturnal animals don't bask in the sun. So bringing the heat from above, it's not really where the ball python wants the heat to come from, right? Ball python's going to get in a hole in the ground. And it wants the ambient temperature and the humidity in there to be at a certain level, right? That's what we've all been told. 90-degree hot spot, 60%, 60 to 70% humidity. Those are the parameters that when I did my research, that's what I found. For me here in the desert, trying to get my cages up to 60 to 70% humidity, you're looking at a wet enclosure all the time. To keep that humidity level, I've got to keep the moisture in there because I'm in the desert. And when you do that, it's probably not as good for the ball python. I've already done the work. I've already made the mistake. I already paid the price. So I've already figured it out. There's no reason why you need to make your animal uncomfortable or do something that's detrimental for them, because I've already done that. I already bumped my head there. And so what I'm trying to do with this video is make it so you don't bump yours at the same spot, right? Because that's what you're trying to do when you're learning. You're learning to try to avoid the mistakes that the people that came before you made. Humidity, good. Wet, no good. If you're somewhere in the country where you've got to make the inside of your enclosure pretty much wet all the time to maintain that humidity level, you're fighting a losing battle. And you're probably making it so your snake's not really that comfortable. You don't want to sacrifice somewhere else to create a number that you're trying to get to. I'm going to tell you this, ball pythons are very forgiving animals, right? If you get your humidity in the enclosure 50-ish, 50%, you'll be fine. You'll be fine. I've been keeping them 13 years, and 90% of my sheds are perfect. I do have a stuck shed every once in a while. I'm not going to lie to you. I think we all do. But I don't have like the same snake all the time get stuck shed, right? It's usually a different snakes here or there. And once, a lot of the snakes in my room were hatched in that room. They ain't never been out of that room. That's all they know, right? So they know how and what to do to get to the comfort zone that they're looking for. All of my snakes have huge water bowls, or they got an extra water tray in there that they can get into, because I understand I'm on the low end when it comes to humidity, right? And so humidity is just moisture. So if my humidity is a little low, but I give you a big water bowl, you're going to be able to get in that water bowl with part or all of your body and get as much moisture as you want. And your entire cage isn't wringing wet all the time. So that's the thing you got to look for, right? Because on ball pythons, moisture and wet cages making conditions where you can start having problems like scale rot and stuff like that. That's how you get that, because your enclosure's wet all the time, and they don't do wet. They don't want to be wet. So the inside of your enclosure, when you touch it with your hands, should feel dry to you, right? And then the humidity is in the air. It's not, it's not laying on the ground. that's the things I want you to think about when you're setting up your enclosures. Heat, where are you bringing it from? Humidity, how are you getting there? And am I always wet? You don't want to be wet to maintain a humidity number. And then the other thing is where am I bringing that heat from? Right? Think about the type of animal that you're keeping. Ball pythons are nocturnal. You're not going to find ball pythons out in the wild basking in the sun. They don't bask. They're nocturnal. They stay out of the sun. So putting lights in your ball python enclosure, that's for you. That's not for them. I've also heard of the CHE, ceramic heat emitter. That's what CHE stands for. It doesn't give off light, but it gives off heat. To an animal that's looking for a hot spot, a hole in the ground, a spot underneath something that's got that temperature and humidity, it's confusing to them. They're not looking for heat coming from above, right? When you research this, they talked about a hot spot. That means a spot on the ground. Taking a temperature, right? You got two types of temperatures. You have a surface temperature and an ambient temperature. If you're collecting your heat and your temperature number from a probe, unless it's taped to the surface of your heat element, you're getting an ambient temperature reading, not a surface temperature reading. But that's okay, because what I do is I don't look to make a 90-degree hot spot. I look to make an 85-degree ambient temperature over my hot spot. And guess what? What I've found in the 13 years is if I can get an ambient temperature, an air temperature, not a surface temperature, of 85 degrees, that hot spot is really close to 90 degrees. 89, 91, whatever it is. Right? And so what I'm doing is I'm giving them the ambient temperature that they're really looking for. Remember, the 90 degrees is a spot on the ground. Right? It's not an ambient temperature. Not a lot of new keepers will make that mistake. They'll make that mistake for an ambient temperature as a surface temperature. When we talk about a 90-degree hot spot, we're talking about a surface temperature. But the ambient temperature over that hot spot isn't going to be 90. It isn't going to be 90, or else that hot spot's going to be 95 degrees or 94. So that's hotter than a 90-degree hot spot. I have done the work. An 85-degree ambient, right? Any little probe thermometer, you put the probe in there on the hot side. You want an ambient reading of 85 degrees. That tells you your hot spot's hotter than 85. And so that's what you've got to understand when you're looking at temps. What are you measuring? Are you measuring a surface temperature? If you're using a heat gun, you're measuring a surface temperature. If you're using a probe is getting you an ambient temperature, the temperature of the air. And that's what I really work on instead of working on a hot spot. Because it's easier for me to check ambient temperatures. I'll throw the probe to a thermometer into the hot spot, and I'll let it sit there for 4 or 5 minutes, and then I'll look at it, pull if it's where I need to be, super. Done. Next cage, I can check that ambient temperature. And I've got 2 or 3 of those thermometers, so I'm checking, multiple enclosures at the same time. Just wanted to pass on that information. A lot of times new keepers will get this 90-degree hot spot confused between ambient and surface. Remember, that 90-degree hot spot's a surface temperature. Ambient temperature 85 is going to be what you want to look for. So if I get the ambient temperature on the warm side to 85, that in a 2-foot to 3-foot enclosure should give me an ambient temperature of about 80 degrees on the cool side. And I think if anybody who's done the research, you've seen a 90-degree hot spot on the hot side, 80-degree ambient, right? And that's the thing. It's very confusing when you're doing the research, right? It's very confusing because they say They want a 90-degree hot spot, and then they want 80 degrees on the cool side. But here's the thing. When they give you that information, they don't tell you that that 90 degrees is a surface temperature and the 80 degrees is an ambient temperature. There's no heat element over here. Are you going to measure the surface temperature of the cage? It's not going to be 80, I promise you. It won't be. So you've got to really understand what temperature you're checking. Ambient or surface. I haven't had a heat gun in years. I started with one, but I really don't need one because I'm looking my probes on my thermostats, and a lot of them are telling me what my heat element is at, and it's setting the heat element. Some of my probes are inside the enclosure. They're measuring an ambient temperature on the hot side of that enclosure. And I'm shooting for 86, 87, because it's attached to the floor over the hot spot. So really want to make sure you understand ambient and surface temps. Because when you hear the 90-degree hot spot with an 80-degree cool side, they're talking about a surface temperature over here, but an ambient temperature over here. And it's confusing. So what I do is I got an 85-degree ambient on the hot side, I got an 80-degree ambient on the cool side. So I'm talking apples to apples, not oranges to apples, right? A little long here on the exit, but I wanted to make sure that you really got that point on heat. The other thing is lighting. Ball pythons don't bask. You don't need any lights. Take all those heat lamps and heat lights and CHEs, take them out. Under tank heat are so much easier. And you're really creating what the ball python is looking for. Because the ball python isn't looking to bask. They're looking for a hole in the ground with an ambient temperature that they're looking for. And the reason I think that they give you that 90-degree hot spot is because when you create that 90-degree hot spot, I found very quickly that you've got an ambient temperature that's not 90. You're trying to make the ambient air on your hot side of the enclosure 90 degrees. Your hot spot's got to be way hotter than 90 degrees. And really, that's what the snake is looking for, is that hot, like a hot rock to lay on. They want the heat to come up from the ground. They want the heat to be in the air, right? They're not so concerned about what the surface temperature is. That's why I go into that big time. I wanted to cover it here again, make sure that you're very clear on that, right? Because it's kind of hard. We're talking about two different measurement styles in the enclosure. So that's that. I'm not going to beat that horse. Get the lights out of your cage. You don't need lights for a nocturnal animal. The lights are for you. They're not for the snake. If you're really doing what your animal wants and what they're looking for, and you're building that enclosure for the animal, not for the human, you don't want lights. No lights. They're nocturnal. They don't want to be in the light. If they wanted to be in the light, they'd be diurnal, and they're not. So you want to build your enclosures and build that enclosure and the parameters inside the enclosure for the animal, right? Not for you. I mean, sure, it looks great with lights and all lit up. It does. But that's not what your ball python's looking for. They're looking for the dark. They want to be in the dark. They don't want to be in the light. So why would you put lights on a nocturnal animal that's trying to get out of the light? Think about it. Think about what you're doing and why you're doing it. Are you putting lights in the enclosure just because aesthetically it looks better to you? And I admit it looks better. But it's not what your snake wants. It's not what they're looking for. They're not. If your snake could pick out its own enclosure and pick out what it would want it to have in there, I guarantee you 100% of the time it would pick the one without lights. Without lights. So think about what you're keeping, why you're keeping it, and how you want to keep it. Do you want to keep it with the parameters that you like better, or do you want to keep it with the parameters that your animal likes better? I would suggest that you set up your enclosure so that it's what your animal wants and not what you want. I just wanted to make sure that I really hit on those points before you ran out of here. Thanks for watching. Thanks for coming in. Remember, before you get out of here, man, like, subscribe, and make a comment. I love to hear the comments. I love interacting with people on my channel. I'll see you next week. You don't want to miss this one. Have a great week, guys. I'll see you later.